Hello and welcome back to episode 11 of The Human Condition. We're jumping straight into a deep dive today, unpacking a single source that offers a really fascinating perspective, maybe a little unsettling too.
Yeah, it's definitely thought-provoking. This isn't really about finding easy answers. It's more about challenging well, a very common assumption we all make about navigating life.
Exactly. The source we're exploring today is excerpts from a piece called The Persistence of Disorientation. And its core idea basically is this. What if feeling lost or, disoriented isn't some temporary glitch, not something abnormal we need to fix?
Right? What if it's actually the default state, especially now in the modern world?
It's a big idea.
Yeah.
So our mission in this deep dive is to try and get past that maybe initial resistance you might feel hearing that.
We want to dig into why the piece makes this argument, pull out its key insights, and really think about what it might mean for how you see your own moments of feeling adrift.
So let's start with the central question the source kind of asks you to hold on to. What if feeling disoriented isn't actually a problem to fix, but maybe a fundamental part of just participating in life? Okay, so let's unpack that first big idea. Disorientation as the default. I mean, we are so conditioned culturally to think feeling lost or fragmented is wrong.
Totally. It's always find yourself,
Yeah.
right? As if the self is this, stable object hidden somewhere.
And the source really pushes back on that. It says we treat the self like a fixed coordinate, just waiting on some kind of psychic map.
But it argues the self is actually much more fluid. The description used is more like a shifting constellation of obligations, impulses, and half-resolved
A
contradictions.
shifting constellation. I like that. It feels more dynamic. And the piece points out how all these external forces shape this fragmented self.
Like our desires are pushed by, algorithms we don't understand. It's a bit creepy when you think about it.
Or our memories. They used to feel maybe more solid. Now they're constantly interrupted by endless distraction.
And even introspection, looking inward. The source says that gets filtered through performances, either for other people or maybe just for ourselves, for that inner audience.
Yeah, performing competence even in our own head. So it makes you wonder, is this feeling, this fragmentation, actually new?
Or, like the source asks, have we always been this fragmented, just more aware of it now because of everything coming at us and the pressure to seem coherent?
That's a really good question. Because even if fragmentation is the reality, there's still this incredibly intense human need, this demand clarity, cohesion, a narrative that makes sense. We crave that story.
We absolutely do. And the source highlights the conflict. Much of human life simply doesn't make neat, logical sense.
Right. Think about it. People behave irrationally, love inconsistently, remember inaccurately. It's not exactly orderly data.
We're trying to build this solid identity out of what often feels like, well, the source calls it raw noise.
And that deep yearning to be understood, to understand, the source calls it noble, which it is, but also potentially deeply exhausting.
Constantly striving for perfect clarity, perfect understanding. Yeah, it's tiring.
And this leads to a really provocative question from the source, one that's worth sitting with for a moment. Have we made too much of understanding?
Yeah, is it always clarity we need or compassion for the confusion? When you're feeling lost, maybe the answer isn't finding the map, but just being okay with being lost for a bit, giving yourself that grace.
It's a challenge and reframe, kindness towards the confusion itself, not just as a step towards clarity.
And adding to this disorientation, the source argues, is this uniquely modern thing, the burden of modern choice and self-invention.
Ah, yes. The idea that the modern individual is burdened by choice masquerading as freedom. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's this paradox, right? We're told constantly, you can be anything, do anything, believe anything, sounds great, total freedom. But the source argues we're simultaneously left with no stable ground on which to decide, no shared coordinates, fewer established paths.
So, in the absence of shared coordinates, this idea of finding your personal truth stops feeling like a guiding beacon and starts feeling like a heavy burden.
Exactly. Because the unspoken expectation is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
You have to invent our own and then defend it publicly, confidently, aesthetically. You have to package it nicely.
Wow. And the source just asks, quite plainly, who thrives under such pressure? Who actually feels ready for that task?
It really makes you question if this constant pressure to curate and project a perfect defined self isn't actually creating a lot of the disorientation we feel.
So, moving from the individual feeling, the source zooms out. It suggests disorientation isn't just your problem or my problem. It's the ambient condition of our time.
Yeah, it's in the air we breathe, basically. not an individual pathology.
And technology plays a huge role here, doesn't it? The source acknowledges the accelerated access to information, which seems good.
But it argues tech also fractures our sense of continuity. We end up stuck in this
Relentless now, where the past becomes flattened into trivia and the future just feels like this anxiety-inducing fog.
hmm And because of that digital pressure, long-term thinking is crowded out by the immediacy of response, this constant need to react, to perform
To
relevance.
form relevance, yeah. Show you're plugged in right now. And in that kind of environment, the source observes kind of chillingly that stability itself begins to look like negligence,
Like if you're not overwhelmed, you're somehow not paying attention. Only the overwhelmed are truly awake.
which forces that uncomfortable question back on us. But must we always perform our awareness? Is that constant vigilance really the price of being, I don't know, a good person now?
It sounds exhausting just describing it.
And that feeling of being watched, of needing to perform, it bleeds into our inner lives too. The source calls it the commodification of the inner life.
Oof. Yeah. Even our inner lives are no longer private.
How so? What does it mean by commodification here?
It talks about how social media, personal branding, all that stuff has turned reflection into content and vulnerability into capital.
Vulnerability into capital. Wow. So we share not just to connect, but
But as the source puts it, we don't share to connect. We share to be seen managing our emotions efficiently. It has to look productive.
and there's a specific kind of pressure there, isn't there? The source notes, suffering becomes palatable only if it demonstrates growth.
Right. You can share the struggle, but only if it ends with a neat lesson learned, a clear, I'm better now message.
But real growth, the source argues it's often silent, unphotogenic, unresolved,
Yeah.
messy.
Which leads to a really important question for all of us. Is there space for growth that leads nowhere in particular? Can we allow for struggle that doesn't have a neat, shareable ending? Think about your own life. Was it always a clean upward curve?
This pressure to look like you've got it all figured out, especially online, leads to this concept the source calls existential professionalism.
Existential professionalism. I like that term. It's the need to appear composed, intentional, enlightened, even about the big, messy stuff of life.
Like we're all supposed to be spiritual gurus managing our inner states perfectly.
Yeah. But the source offers this counterview, which feels, well, more honest maybe. Deep down, many of us are improvising.
And why are we improvising? The source is clear. It's not because we are weak.
Right. It's because reality exceeds our frameworks. Life is just too complex, too unpredictable.
It uses that great map analogy. No map can account for every storm, every unexpected detour. Your plans only get you so far.
Exactly. Reality just happens. And that truth, we're mostly making it up as we go along, the source asks. But how often do we admit that out loud?
Okay, so if we're all improvising, if the world is confusing, if the pressure is intense, maybe chasing perfect clarity isn't the goal.
The source suggests a different path. Perhaps it's not meaning we must chase, but permission.
Permission. Permission for what?
Permission to be lost, to not know. Permission to revise our understanding of ourselves again and again without shame.
Wow. Permission to be a work in progress, basically, without feeling guilty about it.
And crucially, permission to ask better questions rather than demand final answers, to stay curious rather than needing certainty.
That sounds liberating, actually, but the source immediately follows up with a challenge, doesn't it?
It does. But can we bear to live inside the questions indefinitely? Can we really handle that discomfort, that not knowing long term?
So if chasing clarity is exhausting, maybe impossible, what's left? What gives life value then? The source pivots here towards something it calls the underrated power of endurance and persistence.
Yeah, it suggests the human experience doesn't actually owe us clarity. It's not guaranteed.
But what it does offer is the chance to be present, to witness, to endure.
Perhaps endurance is underrated. And it's not talking about, dramatic heroic struggle necessarily.
More like the quiet defiance of waking up again, making tea, answering a message, carrying the weight of yesterday into another today, just keeping going.
And the source finds a kind of nobility in this repetition, precisely because it's honest. It's the real stuff of life.
But then, reflecting our current moment, it asks that sharp question. But is honesty itself still valued or just another aesthetic?
Ouch. Yeah. Is persistence only valuable if you can make a compelling story out of it online?
And if wisdom doesn't come from those big aha moments, where does it come from, according to this piece?
It suggests wisdom arrives more often, sideways. unexpectedly,
Yeah.
quietly.
Through things like small acts of patience, recognizing that presence, however fractured, is still presence.
Exactly, and accepting that the world rarely waits for us to feel ready, so we just have to jump in, unready,
Hmm.
with messy hearts and unfinished thoughts.
I like that. And even the quiet times, the boring times have value. Even in silence, even in boredom, there is data.
Because something is always shaping us.
Mhm.
Not just the big dramatic events, but the slow, aching consistency of living. Those quiet moments are part of the process.
The source makes a really poignant point here. We underestimate how much strength it takes to simply absorb the day without collapsing beneath it, just to get through.
It's true. We often minimize that effort. But then it asks you, the listener, but should we have to be this strong all the time? Is that sustainable?
And this connects right back to the main theme. Maybe what makes us most human is not our clarity, but our insistence on continuing without it.
Yeah, the dignity of persistence, the stubborn grace of being unfinished and still going. It is in the trying, not the arriving.
And every mistake, every stumble is a kind of knowledge. Even the boring bits matter.
Every stretch of time where nothing dramatic happens yet we continue is a quiet kind of miracle. It gives these really concrete examples.
Like evenings spent folding laundry despite despair, or calling a friend even when we don't know what to say.
Or feeding ourselves, again, not out of joy, but obligation, and realizing somehow there's meaning even in that. Or maybe just the possibility of meaning, a placeholder.
The source also plays with our metaphors for the self. We tend to think of the soul or self as a sharp thing defined, precise, something solid you find.
Right, but it offers this alternative metaphor. Maybe it's more like sediment.
Sediment, like layers building up.
Exactly, layers of accumulated moments, most of them forgettable, all of them necessary.
So ourselves are not found, they are layered into being. Build over time, experience by experience.
Which feels very different from finding a pre-existing core. But then the tricky question comes back. But who gets to decide which layers matter? Which parts of our sediment define us?
Is it us? Is it society? Is it the algorithm again? And this layering process isn't about reaching certainty.
No, it's about going on, not toward certainty, but through it. Through the doubts, the guilt, finding some grace just in the act of trying. Is that faith? Or just plain stubbornness? Maybe both.
So if certainty isn't the goal, where does hope fit in, according to this perspective?
It suggests hope might live not in epiphanies, but in endurance. In that small, maybe daily vow to keep going, even when nothing makes sense. Especially then.
There's a poetry to the barely held together, it says. A kind of sacredness in the way we keep showing up, despite frayed nerves and sagging faith.
It highlights these acts of quiet bravery. Things like caring for others without feeling like enough, or showing kindness when the world lacks it.
Things that often go unnoticed, which leads to that question. Does it count if no one notices? Does it still matter?
And the source argues, yes, it absolutely matters. These invisible acts, washing dishes while grieving, staying sober in silence, forgiving without applause, these are the scaffolding of civilization.
Wow, that's a powerful claim. We focus so much on the exceptional, the big achievements.
But the source insists it's the unexceptional that sustain us. The daily grind, the small, decent choices we make over and over.
It's the accumulation of small choices, daily decencies, deferred dreams, and quiet reckonings that hold the human story together.
Yeah. But then there's that slightly worrying follow-up. But for how long can we hold it? How resilient is that scaffolding?
This perspective even reframes history. We usually think of history as, big events, wars, discoveries.
Right. But the source says it's also maintenance.
Maintenance,
Like the decision to make the bed, to show up to work, to take care of a pet. These mundane, repetitive acts.
It argues these things are not footnotes. They are its foundation, the constant, quiet effort holding everything together.
It's a really different way to think about significance. And it asks us, but how do we honor something so ordinary? How do we value that maintenance?
And related to that, while the world seems to reward spectacle and demands we perform our best selves,
The source suggests perhaps the deepest lives are those never fully seen.
why unseen? Not because they lack importance.
No, not at all. But because their greatness was embedded in care, in self-restraint, in persistence that asked for nothing in return, a quieter form of greatness.
So, bringing this whole deep dive back to you, the listener, the source offers this final grounding thought.
It says, when the days stretch on, indistinct and difficult, and you feel like nothing is adding up, remember, it already counts. Your continuation counts.
What counts specifically? Your breath, your effort, your unphotogenic kindness.
Even if it's not always enough to feel like it does, that feeling isn't the measure of its value.
So that was our exploration of the persistence of disorientation. A challenging idea, definitely, but maybe also strangely comforting. The idea that feeling lost might actually be the norm.
Yeah, and that real strength, according to this source, isn't about achieving perfect clarity or finding some fixed self. It's in the endurance, the persistence, those quiet, unexceptional acts.
As the source concludes, maybe we are not here to win, we are here to witness, to learn what we can, to carry what we must.
And to make, in the quietest ways imaginable, something worth leaving behind, or at the very least, something we can live with.
Which leaves us with this final thought to mull over. What if the goal isn't to overcome disorientation, to finally arrive? What if it's about learning to live within its constant shifting presence?
How does embracing that change what you value, how you measure success in your own life? Not just the big wins, but the quiet daily effort of just continuing.
Yeah.
Something to think about.